I swear I can still hear the echo of that laughter. My family's laughter. The same voices that once sang lullabies to me when I was small. The same voices that cheered for me when I graduated. The same voices that were supposed to be celebrating my mother's 65th birthday, not mocking me in the middle of it. That night was supposed to be hers. My mom, Patricia, had worked her whole life to hold us together. She raised 4 kids while working double shifts at the hospital in Dallas, Texas, never once complaining. When Dad passed away in 2004, it was her strength that kept the family intact. I'd spent weeks planning this party at a rented hall near White Rock Lake. We had soft jazz playing, the food was catered from a local favorite, and the cake, the cake was 3 tiers of chocolate ganache and buttercream. Everything was perfect, until it wasn't. My son, Ethan, stood up, his drink still in hand. He grinned, looked right at me, and with the confidence only a 23-year-old could have, he said, "Mom, when will it be your turn to have a party like this? Or are you just too old for something so special?" The timing was cruel. The hall had just quieted down after a round of toasts, everyone waiting for the next moment of joy. And instead, they got my humiliation. The laughter started small. My cousin in the back chuckled first, but then it spread like wildfire. My aunts covered their mouths. My brothers chuckled a little too loudly. Even my sisters shook their heads with smirks. In less than 10 seconds, the celebration shifted from honoring my mother to laughing at me. I laughed too. At least that's what it looked like. But inside, my chest tightened. My throat burned. My cheeks flushed so hot I could feel them glow. I tried to swallow down the embarrassment, but it lodged itself like a stone in my stomach. I had become the joke of the night, served up like one of the appetizers we'd ordered. And my son, the boy I gave life to, the boy I stayed up with during fevers, the boy I cheered on at baseball games, was the one holding the knife. I forced myself to smile, to pretend I wasn't dying inside. I thought, if I make a scene, I'll ruin Mom's night. And so I clinked my glass, raised it to my mother, and said, "Well, tonight isn't about me. It's about the woman who deserves all of this." The room cheered again, but I knew the tone had shifted. Some people looked guilty, some looked amused, and some probably didn't notice at all. But I noticed. I noticed. That moment broke something in me. Something small, maybe, but something that had been fragile for years. Respect. That word kept circling in my head as I stood there, pretending to enjoy the rest of the evening. Respect. I realized I didn't have it. Not from my son, not from my siblings, not from half the people in that room. And that was the night everything began to change. Now, before I go on, let me pause to ask you something. If you were me, standing in a room full of family, humiliated by your own child, would you have laughed it off? Or would you have said something then and there? Be honest with yourself. And while you think about it, do me a favor. Subscribe to this channel. It takes me hours to write these stories out, and if you've made it this far, the least you can do is hit that button. Because trust me, things are about to get much darker. After that night, I couldn't stop replaying the moment in my head. Ethan's grin, the roar of laughter, my frozen smile. Even days later, when I sat at my kitchen table with my morning coffee, the bitterness of the memory tasted stronger than the drink in my mug. But to understand why it cut me so deeply, you'd have to understand the family I come from, and the role I've always played within it. I was born and raised in Dallas, Texas, the second oldest of 4 kids. My brother Michael came first, then me, then my sisters, Angela and Diane. My parents, Patricia and Leonard, were the kind of couple people in the neighborhood looked up to. They hosted church picnics, lent money to relatives when they were struggling, and never missed a chance to bring people together. But after my dad passed away suddenly from a heart attack in 2004, everything changed. My mom, strong as she was, leaned heavily on me. I was 29 at the time, with Ethan barely 2 years old on my hip, and yet I became the one she called when bills piled up, when the roof leaked, when someone in the family got into trouble. Michael, being the eldest, should have taken on that role. But Michael had always been the type to disappear when things got tough. He ran his own HVAC business in Fort Worth and used work as an excuse to avoid responsibility. Angela, The third born had just started her nursing career back then, and she buried herself in shifts at Parkland Hospital. Diane, the youngest, was barely out of high school and in no position to help. So, it fell on me, the dependable one. And dependable I was. For years, if anyone needed babysitting, money, a ride to the airport, or just someone to vent to, I was there. Even now, in my mid-40s, I still carried that role like a second skin. That's why Ethan's words at the party hurt more than just a playful jab. They exposed a truth I had buried for years. I wasn't seen as someone worthy of celebration. I was seen as someone who existed to serve. Ethan himself, well, he's complicated. He's my only child. The product of a short-lived marriage that ended when his father, Robert, decided he preferred freedom over family. Robert moved to Houston, remarried, and built a new life. Meanwhile, I stayed, raised Ethan alone, and worked 2 jobs to give him everything he needed. Maybe I spoiled him. Maybe I made too many sacrifices that he never even realized. He never saw the nights I went without new clothes, so he could wear the latest sneakers. He never noticed how many times I said no to dinners with friends, so I could save money for his summer camps. To him, things just appeared. That's what love looked like from his side. And I never corrected that perception, because I didn't want him to feel guilty. I wanted him to feel secure, loved, and carefree. But maybe in doing so, I raised him without teaching him respect. At the party, when he made that comment, it wasn't just a joke. It was a window into how he truly saw me. Not as someone deserving of recognition, but as someone whose role was to stand behind others, clapping for them, never expecting the applause to swing back my way. And it wasn't just Ethan. My siblings were much different. Michael had always teased me for being too soft. He once told me I was like the family doormat. Everyone wipes their mess on you and you don't even complain. He said it with a laugh, but it lodged in my chest like a splinter. Angela was more subtle. She often praised me in front of others, saying things like, "We don't know what we'd do without you." But when I needed her, really needed her, she was too busy. She once left me stranded at Love Field Airport after promising me a ride because she picked up an extra shift. And Diane, well, Diane was the baby. Even now, in her late 30s, she still plays the role of the little sister who needs to be cared for. I've bailed her out of rent troubles more times than I can count. Each time she promises to pay me back, and each time the promise evaporates into thin air. The irony of it all is that my mother, the one person I had been trying to honor that night, often scolded me for giving too much. She'd say, "You can't pour from an empty cup, sweetheart." But what she didn't see, or maybe what she chose not to see, was that the family only functioned because I poured myself out. So, when Ethan made his comment, it wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of years of being overlooked, undervalued, and taken for granted. That single sentence was like a spark dropped onto a field of dry grass. After the party, I drove Ethan home in silence. He sat in the passenger seat, scrolling through his phone like nothing had happened. I kept my eyes on the road, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Are you mad at me?" he asked finally, not looking up. "I'm just tired," I said, because the truth that I was humiliated, hurt, and furious felt too heavy to put into words. "Come on, Mom," he said with a chuckle. "It was just a joke." Everyone laughed. And that right there? That was the dagger. Everyone laughed, as if the collective laughter of the room somehow justified turning me into a punchline. I didn't argue. I didn't scold him. I didn't even explain how deep his words had cut. Instead, I nodded, parked the car, and let him go inside without another word. But inside my chest, something shifted. I'd spent decades being the dependable one, the selfless one, the family's backbone. And what did I get in return? A son who thought mocking me in public was entertainment. Siblings who saw me as a resource, not a person. A family who laughed at my expense without hesitation. That night, lying awake in bed, I stared at the ceiling and thought, this is the family I thought I knew. But maybe I don't know them at all. Or maybe I do, and that's the real problem. And with that realization came something new. A seed. Small but alive. The seed of a question I had never dared to ask before. What if I stopped being their dependable doormat? What if for once I made them feel what it's like to be ignored, embarrassed, and taken for granted. That seed didn't sprout right away. It sat in me quietly, like an ember waiting for oxygen. But in time, that ember would catch fire. And when it did, my family would learn that the woman they thought would always laugh it off had teeth and wasn't afraid to bare them. But before I could even think about revenge, I had to face something else myself. Because the truth is, I wasn't just angry at them. I was angry at me. Angry for allowing this pattern to exist for so long. Angry for being the one to sacrifice without ever demanding respect in return. Angry for teaching my son, through my own behavior, that it was okay to treat me like a joke. And that anger, it scared me, because I didn't know what I was capable of when I let it loose. If you were in my shoes, would you have confronted your son right then and there? Or would you have stayed quiet like I did, letting the hurt fester? I wonder sometimes if silence makes us complicit in our own disrespect. What do you think? It would be easier to say that Ethan's comment at the birthday party was the sole reason I decided to change everything. But that wouldn't be true. It was the spark, yes, but sparks don't burn unless they land on something flammable. In my life, it was bone-dry kindling. For a few weeks after the party, I tried to move on. I told myself it wasn't worth dwelling on. I buried myself in my job at the library in Richardson, smiled politely when my coworkers asked how the birthday celebration had gone, and pretended the humiliation had rolled off me like water off a duck's back. But late at night, when the house was quiet and Ethan was out with his friends, I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling and replay the scene again and again. The laughter, my frozen smile, my son's voice dripping with arrogance. It was like a splinter under my skin. No matter how much I tried to ignore it, it throbbed. Still, I might have kept my anger locked inside, if not for what happened 3 weeks later. It was a Sunday afternoon, the kind I usually reserve for catching up with laundry and planning meals for the week. Ethan came downstairs around noon, still groggy from whatever late-night escapades he'd been up to. He plopped down on the couch, phone in hand, and without even looking at me said, "Hey, Mom, I need you to transfer me $200. I promised the guys I'd cover the Airbnb for our trip to Austin next weekend." No, please. No, thank you. No acknowledgement of the fact that I had bills stacked on the counter waiting to be paid. Just expectation. "Ethan," I said carefully, folding the laundry on the coffee table, "I don't have $200 to just hand out right now. I've got rent, utilities, and my car insurance coming up." He groaned, rolling his eyes. "You're always making excuses. It's just $200. You act like I'm asking for a fortune." I froze, a towel half folded in my hands. "Excuses?" "Yeah," he said, finally looking up from his phone. "You're so tight with money. It's embarrassing. Dad never made a big deal out of this stuff." That last sentence hit me harder than a punch. Dad, Robert, the man who abandoned us, who sent child support checks late if at all, who skipped birthdays and holidays. The man who built a new life in Houston while I was working overtime shifts just to keep Ethan clothed and fed. And my son had the audacity to compare me to him favorably. I felt something in me snap. I set the towel down slowly, deliberately, like I was placing evidence in a crime scene. I looked Ethan straight in the eye and said, "Your father left me to raise you alone. He didn't show up for you, Ethan. I did. Every single time. So don't you dare sit there and tell me I'm the problem." He blinked, caught off guard by the sharpness in my voice. But instead of backing down, he smirked. "Geez, relax. It was just a joke." There it was again. That word. Joke. Like my humiliation at the party. Like my financial strain now. All of it, to him, was just a punchline. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake him and make him understand. But I didn't. Because in that moment, something much colder settled over me. I realized that if I kept giving, he would keep taking. If I kept laughing off the disrespect, he would keep dishing it out. And if I kept waiting for him or anyone in my family to recognize my worth, I'd die waiting. That was the real triggering event. Not the birthday party. Not the laughter. But this moment, standing in my own living room, being called an embarrassment by the very person I'd sacrificed everything for. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stared out the window at the street beyond. My reflection in the glass looked different somehow, harder, sharper. Behind me, Ethan called out, "So, are you sending the money or not?" And that's when the decision crystallized. "No," I said simply. There was silence, then the sound of him scoffing. "Fine, whatever. I'll ask Dad." I didn't turn around. I didn't argue. I just sipped my water, letting the cold spread through me like armor. Because in that moment I knew this wasn't just about Ethan anymore. This was about all of them, my siblings, my cousins, my aunts and uncles, the entire family who had laughed at me, leaned on me, and dismissed me for years. Something inside me had shifted. The dependable daughter, the selfless sister, the doting mother, they were gone. In their place stood someone new, someone sharper, someone who had finally realized that if you let people treat you like a doormat long enough, they'll start to believe you like the mud. And I was done. Done being taken for granted. Done being laughed at. Done pouring from an empty cup. As I stood there in my kitchen, Ethan grumbling on the couch behind me, I made myself a promise. They wanted a joke? They wanted someone to laugh at? Fine. But this time, I would be the one laughing last. And my revenge? It would be slow. It would be deliberate. And it would teach every single one of them what it felt like to be humiliated, ignored, and stripped of respect. The seed that had been planted the night of the party was no longer just a spark. It was fire, and I was ready to let it burn. If you were me, would that have been the breaking point for you too? Or would you have just shrugged it off and given him the $200 to keep the peace? I wonder how many times we choose silence just to avoid confrontation, and what it costs us in the long run. When I told Ethan no that Sunday afternoon, it was the first time I'd denied him something in years. I don't think he knew how to process it. He sat there on the couch, phone still in hand, staring at me like I'd just spoken a foreign language. And then came the inevitable sigh, the muttered curse under his breath, the stomp of his feet as he stormed upstairs. The old me would have followed him. I would have knocked gently on his door, softened my tone, tried to explain myself. I would have folded under the weight of his sulking, handed him the $200 just to smooth things over. That was my pattern. Keep the peace. Swallow my own resentment. Smile even when it hurt. But not this time. I stood in that kitchen, glass of water still in my hand, and felt a strange calm wash over me. It wasn't peace exactly. It was resolve. The kind of calm that comes when you realize you're done negotiating with people who don't value you. That night, Ethan didn't come down for dinner. I didn't call him. I ate alone, savoring every bite of roasted chicken and green beans, reminding myself that I didn't owe anyone an explanation for feeding myself first. The next morning, I woke up early, brewed my coffee, and slipped into my work clothes. Normally, I'd peek into Ethan's room before leaving for the library, just to make sure he was awake for his classes. But this time I didn't. He was 23 years old. He didn't need me playing mother hen anymore. When I got home later that evening, Ethan was waiting for me in the living room. His arms were crossed, his jaw tight. "Dad sent me the money," he said flatly. "Good," I replied, setting down my purse. He blinked, clearly expecting me to feel guilty, to rush into an explanation. But I didn't. Instead, I kicked off my shoes, walked into the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of iced tea. "That's it," he pressed. "You don't even care that I had to ask him." I turned, leaning against the counter, and gave him a smile. Not the warm, forgiving smile I usually wore. This one was colder, sharper. "I'm glad you got what you needed," I said simply. The look on his face was priceless. Confusion, frustration, maybe even a little fear. Because for the first time in his life, he realized I wasn't playing my usual role. That was my immediate reaction, not yelling, not arguing, not breaking down. Just calm, calculated, controlled. But it wasn't only Ethan who started noticing the shift. The very next weekend, Angela called me. "Hey, can you watch the kids on Saturday?" I picked up an extra shift. Normally, I'd rearrange my plans, cancel whatever small thing I had scheduled, and say yes without hesitation. But this time I didn't. "I can't," I said. There was a pause. "Oh, well, what do you have going on?" "Plans," I replied, leaving it at that. The silence on the other end of the line was almost satisfying. Angela was so used to me bending over backwards for her that the idea of me having my own life, plans I wasn't willing to cancel, seemed unthinkable. Michael was next. He called a few days later, asking if I could help him move some equipment for his HVAC business. "I'll buy you dinner after," he added, like that was some grand incentive. "I can't," I said again, the words rolling off my tongue more easily this time. "What do you mean you can't?" he asked, half laughing, half annoyed. "I mean I can't," I repeated. "You'll have to figure it out without me." Another pause. Another silence heavy with disbelief. It was almost comical, watching the family react as though I'd broken some unspoken contract. For years, I had been the one who said yes, the dependable one, the problem solver, the fixer. And now, suddenly, I was saying no. And with every no, I felt stronger. Of course, strength didn't come without guilt. There were nights I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, questioning myself. Was I being selfish? Was I abandoning the people I loved? Was I really any better than Robert if I turned my back on them now? But then I'd remember the laughter, the humiliation, the look on Ethan's face when he called me embarrassing, and the guilt would harden into resolve. This wasn't about abandoning them. This was about teaching them, about showing them that I wasn't their doormat, their safety net, their perpetual punchline. The first cracks began to show soon after. Angela called me again, frazzled, because she'd had to pay for a babysitter when I said no. Michael texted me angrily after he pulled a muscle moving that equipment alone. Diane left me a long voicemail, crying about her rent being overdue because I wouldn't lend her money this time. And me, I smiled. Not a warm smile, not a forgiving one. A smile that said, "You're finally feeling what I've felt for years." It wasn't revenge yet, not really. But it was the beginning. The first taste of what it felt like to reclaim my dignity, to stop hiding behind a fake smile and start showing them the storm that had been brewing inside me. And as the weeks went on, that storm only grew. Because the truth was, saying no wasn't enough. Not anymore. They had laughed at me. They had disrespected me. They had taken me for granted. And I wasn't just going to withdraw my help. I was going to make sure they understood, deeply and painfully, what it meant to be on the other side of disrespect. The fire was lit, and soon, the slow burn of revenge would begin. Nights are the hardest. During the day, it's easy to stay busy. Work at the library, errands, cooking, cleaning. The rhythm of life keeps the mind distracted. But at night, when the house is quiet and the only sound is the hum of the refrigerator, that's when the voices in my head get louder. Are you really going to do this? What kind of mother are you, turning cold on your own son? What kind of sister are you, refusing to help your family? I hated those voices, hated the guilt they stirred up. But I also hated how quickly I'd silenced myself for years in the name of keeping everyone else comfortable. It was late one Friday when I found myself standing in the bathroom, staring at my own reflection. The woman in the mirror didn't look like me, not the me I thought I was. Her eyes were sharper, her jawline tighter. She looked tired, yes, but there was a glimmer there, a spark that hadn't been there before. I whispered to her, "You don't have to keep living like this." It sounded ridiculous, talking to myself like that. But maybe I needed to hear it out loud. Because the truth was, my whole life had been a cycle of giving. Even as a child, I was the mediator between my siblings. When Michael and Angela fought, I was the one who smoothed things over. When Diane got into trouble, I was the one who covered for her. By the time I became a mother, self-sacrifice wasn't just a habit, it was my entire identity. I thought about all the times I'd swallowed my own needs. Like when I turned 40. My friends at work wanted to throw me a party, but I declined because Angela was dealing with a messy breakup and I thought it would be insensitive to celebrate myself when she was hurting. Instead of dancing that night, I sat with her on her couch, eating ice cream and listening to her cry about a man who didn't deserve her tears. Or the time Ethan wanted to go to Disneyland with his friends in high school. I couldn't afford it, not really, but I picked up extra shifts, drained my savings, and made it happen. When I finally treated myself to a new laptop the next year, the guilt of spending money on myself gnawed at me until I returned it. I realized, standing there in that bathroom, that I had trained my family to see me as invisible. Because invisible people don't need celebrations. Invisible people don't need respect. Invisible people exist only to make sure everyone else shines. And what had I gotten for all those sacrifices? A son who called me embarrassing. Siblings who laughed at my humiliation. A family that saw me as a utility, not a person. The thought made my stomach twist with anger, but also with clarity. This wasn't about one birthday party. It wasn't about $200. It was about years, decades of being erased. I pressed my palms against the counter and leaned closer to the mirror. No more, I whispered again, firmer this time. That night, I made myself a promise. I wasn't just going to step back and let them feel the absence of my help. That wasn't enough. They needed to learn, to feel what I had felt, to understand the weight of being overlooked and disrespected. But here's the thing about revenge. It can't be sloppy. Sloppy revenge looks desperate. Sloppy revenge makes you look like the villain. No, mine would be careful, calculated, thought out. I didn't want to just lash out. I wanted to dismantle their comfort, piece by piece, until they had no choice but to confront the way they had treated me. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook and a pen. I wrote down names: Ethan, Michael, Angela, Diane. Then under each name, I started listing the ways they relied on me. Ethan, money, laundry, meals, emotional support. Michael, physical help for his business, listening ear when things went wrong. Angela, babysitting, advice, financial help in a pinch. Diane, rent, bills, bailing her out of poor decisions. The list went on, and the longer it got, the more I realized just how much I had been carrying. By the time I set the pen down, a smile crept across my face. For the first time in years, I felt in control. This was the turning point. The moment I decided I wasn't going to be invisible anymore. Some people believe revenge makes you bitter, that it eats away at you. But as I sat there, making that list, I didn't feel bitter. I felt alive, powerful, awake. Because this wasn't about cruelty. It was about balance. They had tipped the scales for years, and now it was my turn to even them out. The first step in any revenge, I decided, is subtlety. If you come out swinging, people see you as the aggressor. They circle the wagons, paint you as the villain, and suddenly your point is lost in the noise. But if you're quiet, deliberate, patient, that's when the cracks start to form. And cracks, once they start, spread fast. I began with Ethan. He was the easiest, and in many ways, the most important. He had grown so used to me cushioning his every fall that he didn't even realize he was standing on a safety net. So I cut the ropes. The laundry? I stopped doing it. For years, I'd picked up his clothes from the floor, washed them, folded them, and placed them neatly on his bed. But now, I left them where they landed. Within a week, his room looked like a thrift store explosion. I didn't say a word, didn't scold, didn't remind. Just let the mess pile up until he finally asked, "Mom, are you going to wash these?" I looked him straight in the eye and said, "No." Meals were next. I've always loved cooking, and Ethan was used to coming downstairs to the smell of home-cooked dinners. But one night, instead of setting the table, I made myself a single plate and sat at the counter. When he wandered into the kitchen, confused, I said, "There's food in the fridge if you want to make something." He opened the fridge, stared at the raw ingredients, and groaned. "You're seriously not going to cook for me?" "I'm cooking for me," I said, taking a slow bite of roasted salmon. "You're old enough to handle yourself." The look on his face was priceless, equal parts disbelief and betrayal. He wasn't used to being told he was responsible for himself. But it wasn't just about household chores. It was financial too. For years, I'd been his safety net, covering overdraft fees, bailing him out when his paycheck didn't stretch far enough. This time, when he came to me complaining about his phone bill, I shrugged. "That sounds tough," I said calmly, sipping my coffee. "You're not going to help?" he asked, his voice rising. "No," I replied simply. Watching him squirm was oddly satisfying, not because I wanted him to fail, but because I wanted him to understand. To finally feel the weight I'd been carrying alone for so long. Meanwhile, I turned my attention to Angela. She had leaned on me for childcare more times than I could count, always assuming I'd drop everything to step in. So, when she called me one Saturday morning in a panic, saying her sitter had canceled last minute, I delivered my first no with a calm I didn't even know I had. I can't, I told her. What do you mean you can't? She asked, her voice sharp with disbelief. I mean I can't, I repeated. You'll have to figure something else out. There was a long silence on the other end of the line before she muttered something under her breath and hung up. Later, I found out she'd had to call off her shift and lost a day's pay. Michael was trickier. He prided himself on being independent, but the truth was, he relied on me for backup more than he admitted. Whenever his business hit a snag, whether it was an employee quitting or a client refusing to pay, he'd call me to vent. And I'd listen. For hours, offering advice, comfort, reassurance. This time, when he called, I let it go to voicemail. When he called again, I texted, can't talk right now. Busy. The flood of texts that followed, angry, accusatory, demanding, were almost comical. He didn't want my help, not really. He wanted my attention. And when he didn't get it, he unraveled. Diane was last. The baby sister. The one who always came to me with financial crises. When she called about being short on rent, I calmly said, I'm sorry I can't help you this time. Her response was immediate. Wow, really? After everything I've done for you? I almost laughed. After everything she'd done for me? The audacity was stunning. But I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I simply said, yes, really, and hung up. The beauty of it all was in the silence. I didn't need to raise my voice, slam doors, or announce that I was changing. My absence spoke louder than any argument ever could. Within weeks, the cracks started to spread. Angela complained to Diane that I'd changed. Michael accused me of thinking I'm better than everyone. Diane sent passive-aggressive texts about how families should help each other. And Ethan? He sulked. He stomped. He muttered under his breath. But slowly I started noticing changes. He did his own laundry. He made his own meals, poorly but still. He even picked up extra shifts at work to cover his bills. For the first time, I saw glimpses of the man he could be if he wasn't cushioned by me. And though I didn't say it out loud, I felt a strange mix of pride and satisfaction. But revenge is a slippery slope. At first, it felt good just to step back, to let them flounder without me. But the more I watched them scramble, the more I realized stepping back wasn't enough. They had humiliated me, laughed at me, reduced me to a joke. And while my absence was inconvenient, it wasn't nearly enough to match the sting they had left in me. No, I wanted more than inconvenience. I wanted accountability, exposure. I wanted them to feel what it was like to have their flaws laid bare for others to see. That's when the next phase of my plan began to take shape. Because silence was powerful, yes, but silence could only take me so far. The slow burn was just beginning, and soon the fire would spread. It's funny how people only notice your value when you stop giving it away for free. At first, my family treated my withdrawal like a phase. Michael told Angela I was probably going through menopause and that I'd snap out of it soon. Angela whispered to Diane that maybe I was just stressed from work. Ethan even muttered once, loud enough for me to hear, that I was being dramatic. But weeks turned into months, and I didn't snap out of it. I didn't return to the dependable woman they knew. And little by little, the cracks in their perfect facades began to show. Angela was the first to stumble. One Saturday, she showed up at my door unannounced, kids in tow. I opened the door, surprised, and she immediately launched into her usual frantic pitch. My sitter canceled again, and I'm supposed to be at the hospital in 30 minutes. Please, just this once, can you watch them? Old me would have caved. Old me would have taken those kids with a smile, canceling my own plans for the day. But this wasn't old me. I can't, I said firmly. Her eyes widened. Patricia. No, I repeated. She stared at me for a long moment, like she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. Then, without another word, she turned on her heel, dragged her kids back to the car, and sped off. Later, I found out from Diane that Angela had missed her shift. Her supervisor at Parkland wasn't happy. She'd already been on thin ice for calling off too many times, and this pushed her closer to disciplinary action. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. But inside, a small voice whispered, "Now you know how it feels to be stretched too thin." Michael was next. His HVAC business had always been rocky, booming in summer when air conditioners broke down, slower in winter when fewer people needed him. Usually, when he hit a rough patch, he'd call me. I'd help with invoices, answer calls, even cover gas for his work van when he was short. This time, I didn't pick up the phone. Instead, I watched from the sidelines as he vented on Facebook about fake family who don't support small businesses. He got a few sympathy comments, but I noticed something else in the replies. Customers complaining that he didn't return calls, that his work wasn't up to standard, that he was unreliable. For the first time, his public image started to slip. And without me there to prop him up, he had no one to redirect the blame to but himself. Diane, of course, was the most dramatic. When I refused to cover her rent again, she blasted me in a group text with our cousins. Some people pretend to be family, but disappear when you actually need them. She expected everyone to rally around her. But instead, the responses were lukewarm at best. One cousin even replied, "Maybe you should budget better." I almost laughed out loud. And Ethan, my sweet boy, he suffered the most quietly, but the most profoundly. Without me managing the household, he had to step up in ways he'd never imagined. His clothes were wrinkled, his meals were haphazard, his bills were piling up. I could see the strain in his shoulders, the exhaustion in his eyes. But I didn't step in. Not this time. The real turning point came one Sunday at church. We'd all grown up attending the same small Baptist church near Oak Cliff, and though attendance had dwindled in recent years, family members still showed up enough to keep up appearances. That morning, during coffee hour after service, I overheard two women whispering, "Did you hear about Angela? Almost lost her job. And Michael, his business is tanking. Shame." I sipped my coffee quietly, a small smile tugging at my lips, because for once, the whispers weren't about me. But the real blow came when Pastor Harris pulled me aside. He was an older man, kind, with eyes that always seemed to see more than you wanted him to. "Patricia," he said gently, "your family seems to be going through a rough patch. Are you all right?" I nodded. "I'm fine, Pastor. Just taking a step back." He studied me for a moment, then smiled knowingly. Sometimes stepping back is the most powerful thing you can do. That conversation lingered with me, because it wasn't just about stepping back anymore. It was about letting the exposure happen naturally. I didn't have to announce their failures. I didn't have to smear their names. All I had to do was stay silent and let them unravel on their own. The fallout grew. Angela called me one night, crying, saying she'd been written up at work. Michael posted another rant online, this time accusing the haters of trying to ruin his business. Diane showed up at my house, pounding on the door, demanding money I no longer owed her. And Ethan, well, he finally admitted he was behind on rent for his own apartment. "Can't you just help me this once?" he asked, desperation creeping into his voice. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not a child anymore, but a man being forced to grow up. "No, Ethan," I said softly. "It's time you learned to stand on your own." His jaw clenched, his eyes glistened, but he said nothing. And for once, neither did I. The exposure wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, subtle, but it was real. My family, who had laughed at me, who had dismissed me, who had relied on me without respect, were starting to feel the weight of their own choices. And me, I felt lighter than I had in years. But revenge, I realized, wasn't just about letting them stumble. It was about confrontation, about making them face me, not as the doormat they thought I was, but as the woman who had finally found her power. That confrontation was coming. I could feel it. And when it came, I would be ready. I always knew the day would come when silence wouldn't be enough, that my family, pushed far enough, would stop sulking behind my back and come straight to me. What I didn't know was how satisfying that day would feel. It started with Angela. She showed up at my house on a Tuesday evening, long after I'd settled in with a cup of chamomile tea and a good book. The knock on the door was sharp, frantic, the kind that makes your stomach tighten. I opened it to find her standing there, hair frazzled, kids tugging at her sleeves. Patricia, I can't do this anymore, she blurted before I could even greet her. Work is threatening to suspend me. I can't keep missing shifts, and I don't have anyone else to help with the kids. Please, just this once, I need you. Her eyes were wide, pleading, but all I felt was a strange calm. Angela, I said softly, I warned you years ago that you were relying on me too much. You didn't listen. You assumed I'd always be there. And now you're learning what it feels like when I'm not. She blinked, stunned. So you're just what? Going to let me lose my job? I sipped my tea, unbothered. Your job is your responsibility, not mine. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She had no script for this version of me, the version who didn't fold under guilt. Finally, she muttered, You've changed. I smiled faintly. Yes, I have. And then, without another word, I closed the door. It should have hurt to turn my back on her, but instead, it felt like freedom. 2 days later, it was Michael. He didn't bother knocking politely. He pounded on my door like the police, shouting my name loud enough for the neighbors to hear. When I finally opened the door, he was red-faced, sweat beading on his forehead. Are you kidding me, Patricia? He barked. You've been ignoring my calls, letting me drown out here. My business is falling apart, and you can't even take 10 minutes to help me organize invoices? What the hell is wrong with you? The old me would have bristled, maybe even apologized. But the new me? I met his rage with silence. When he realized I wasn't going to argue, he scoffed. You think you're better than us now, huh? Sitting here all smug while the rest of us are struggling? Don't forget, you're nothing without this family. That line might have once cut deep, but now it just rolled off me. Michael, I said evenly, I've been nothing because of this family for years. Now, I'm finally something without you. His jaw dropped. For a moment, he looked like he might swing at me. But instead, he cursed under his breath, stormed off, and peeled out of my driveway. I watched him go with the same calm I'd shown Angela. 2 down. Diane, of course, was less dramatic but more pathetic. She called me late at night, her voice thick with tears. Please, Patricia, she sobbed. I don't know what to do. My landlord's threatening to evict me. I swear I'll pay you back this time. I closed my eyes, letting her words wash over me. How many times had I heard this same plea, this same promise? No, Diane, I said quietly. Her breath hitched. But I'll be homeless. Then maybe it's time you learned how to take care of yourself. The silence on the line stretched for what felt like forever. Finally, she whispered, You're cruel. No, I corrected her. I'm done. And then I hung up. Each confrontation left me lighter, stronger, more certain of the path I'd chosen. But the one I'd been waiting for most was Ethan. He didn't come to me right away. He tried to handle things on his own. Burned dinners, wrinkled shirts, late bills. But eventually, the weight became too much. It was a Saturday afternoon when he finally cracked. He came downstairs, eyes bloodshot, jaw tight, and dropped a stack of overdue bills on the kitchen counter. Mom, he said, his voice trembling with frustration, I can't do this. I'm behind on everything. My car's about to get repossessed. I need your help. For a moment, the mother in me wanted to reach out, to fix it, to make it all go away like I always had. But then I remembered the birthday party, the laughter, the humiliation. No, I said firmly. His head snapped up, disbelief flashing in his eyes. No, that's it? You're just going to watch me fail. I've been watching you fail for years, I replied. The only difference is I used to clean up your messes before you had to face them. Not anymore. He slammed his fist on the counter, making the bills scatter. You don't even care about me. That one stung. More than I wanted to admit. But I didn't let it show. I care enough to stop enabling you, I said softly. His chest heaved with anger. For a moment, I thought he might storm out. But instead, he sank into a chair, buried his face in his hands, and let out a sound that was half sob, half growl. And me. I sat across from him, calm, composed, unmoved. Because this was the confrontation I'd been waiting for. Not the yelling, not the anger, but the breaking. The moment when he realized I wasn't his safety net anymore. And though it hurt to see him like that, it also filled me with a strange sense of justice. Because maybe, just maybe, this was the only way he'd ever learn. By the end of that week, all four of them, Angela, Michael, Diane, and Ethan, had tried to confront me. And all four had been met with the same calm refusal. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one scrambling to fix things. They were. And I knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. The tables had turned, and I had no intention of turning them back. The thing about revenge is that it changes more than just the target. It changes you. When I first started pulling away, I expected anger, resentment, even hostility. And I got plenty of that. But what I hadn't expected was the quiet moments, the pauses in the chaos, the flickers of change that made me wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was hope for something better. It started with Ethan. A week after his outburst at the kitchen table, he came downstairs one evening holding a basket of laundry. Not for me to do, for himself. I watched as he separated his clothes into piles, poured in detergent, and started the machine. He didn't say a word, but I caught the way his jaw tightened, his shoulders squared. It wasn't anger anymore. It was determination. Later that night, I peeked into the kitchen and found him clumsily following a YouTube recipe on his phone, trying to make pasta. The noodles stuck together, the sauce was watery, and he cursed under his breath more than once, but he was trying. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't see my little boy who cracked jokes at my expense. I saw a man, fumbling but learning. One morning, over coffee, he surprised me even more. "Mom," he said, eyes fixed on his mug, I'm sorry for what I said at Grandma's party, and for how I treated you after." The words were awkward, halting, but they were there. Real. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Apologies weren't common in my family. Defensiveness, excuses, blame, those were our currencies. But genuine accountability? That was rare. "Thank you," I said simply. He nodded, then went quiet again. It wasn't a grand speech, but it was something. A flicker of change. Angela, too, began to shift, though more out of necessity than remorse. After losing her right up at work, she had to get serious about her schedule. She hired a more reliable sitter, cut back on last-minute shifts, and, to my surprise, stopped calling me every time she hit a snag. One Sunday after church, she even approached me in the parking lot. "I know you think I take advantage of you," she said, arms crossed. And maybe I did. But I don't hate you for stepping back. I just hate that it had to come to this. It wasn't exactly an apology, but it wasn't nothing either. Michael, predictably, was the slowest to change. Pride was his armor, and it took a lot to crack it. But even he started to show signs. His Facebook rants grew shorter, less frequent. He began networking with other contractors instead of venting online. And though he never said it directly, I noticed his calls shifted from demands to simple check-ins. "Hey sis," he'd say casually, "just wondering how you're doing." It was subtle, but I recognized it for what it was, an olive branch. Diane was Diane. She still sent the occasional guilt-ridden text, still tried to borrow money, still played the victim. But even she began spacing out her pleas. Maybe she was finally realizing the well had run dry. Through it all, I found myself standing at a crossroads. Part of me wanted to embrace these changes, to soften, to let them back in. After all, hadn't that been the point? To make them see, to force them to respect me? But another part of me hesitated, because forgiveness without boundaries is just an invitation for history to repeat itself. One evening, I sat on my porch in Oak Cliff, the cicadas humming in the warm Dallas air, and thought about my mother. She had spent her whole life giving, cooking, cleaning, holding the family together through sheer willpower. And when she passed, everyone praised her as the rock of the family. But I remembered the exhaustion in her eyes, the quiet moments when she sat alone, too tired to even lift her head. I didn't want to end up like her, respected only in death. So I made a decision. If my family wanted redemption, they would have to earn it. Not with words, not with half-hearted gestures, but with consistency, with action, with proof that they understood I was no longer their safety net. The first test came sooner than I expected. One evening, Ethan asked if I'd teach him how to cook something properly. Not do it for him, teach him. So I pulled out the ingredients for roasted chicken and vegetables, walked him through the steps, and let him take the lead. He made mistakes, yes, but he listened. He learned. And when we sat down to eat, he actually smiled. "This tastes not bad," he admitted, and we both laughed. It was a small thing, but it mattered. Angela's test came a week later. She invited me to dinner, not to her house, but out at a little restaurant in downtown Dallas. "I just wanted to say thank you," she told me over enchiladas, "for not bailing me out. Because if you had, I don't think I'd have figured it out." Again, not a full apology, but an acknowledgement. And for Angela, that was huge. Michael's test was harder. He asked me to look over one of his contracts. My instinct was to say no, to push him to handle it himself. But then I realized this was different. He wasn't asking me to do it for him. He was asking me to show him how. So I did. Slowly, carefully, walking him through the fine print. And when he shook my hand afterward, I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen before: respect. As for Diane, well, she's still failing her test. But that's her choice, not mine. The redemption arc wasn't dramatic. There were no tearful reunions, no big family declarations of love. Just small shifts, small flickers of growth. Enough to remind me that maybe my revenge hadn't been about destruction at all. Maybe it had been about transformation. Still, I kept my boundaries firm. I didn't let their progress lure me back into old habits. I helped when I chose to, not when they demanded it. I offered guidance, not solutions. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was standing on equal ground with them, not beneath their feet. The road ahead wasn't clear. I knew there would be setbacks, backslides, disappointments. But I also knew this: I wasn't going back to who I was before. Because revenge, in the end, hadn't just changed them. It had changed me. And maybe that was the greatest victory of all. Resolution doesn't arrive with trumpets or fireworks. It arrives quietly, like the first light of dawn, barely noticeable until you realize the whole world has shifted. For me, resolution came one ordinary Sunday morning. I woke up to the sound of silence. Not the heavy, suffocating kind I'd felt after the birthday party, but a light, peaceful kind. Ethan was in the kitchen making himself breakfast. I could hear the clink of pans, the soft murmur of music playing from his phone. I lay there for a moment, listening. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of being needed. I felt free. When I finally joined him in the kitchen, he handed me a plate. Scrambled eggs, toast, bacon. Simple, but cooked with care. "Made enough for both of us," he said shyly. I smiled, sitting down. "Thank you." We ate together in comfortable silence. No jokes at my expense. No guilt tripping. Just two people sharing a meal. And in that moment, I realized the power of everything I'd done. It wasn't about humiliating them back. It wasn't about evening the score. It was about reclaiming myself. Later that week, Angela called, not to ask for a favor, but to invite me to lunch. She wanted to talk, she said, about balancing her work and her kids. Not for me to fix, but for advice. That was new. Michael stopped by, too, dropping off a gift card to Home Depot. "For your garden," he said gruffly, "since you've been helping me with contracts." His words were clumsy, but the gesture was real. Even Diane surprised me. She sent a text, just 3 words. "I'm trying, Patty." It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd ever given me before. The circle wasn't perfect. The wounds weren't magically healed, but there was progress, and for me that was enough. One evening, as the sun dipped low over Oak Cliff, I sat on my porch with a glass of iced tea, staring at the small rose bush I'd planted earlier that spring. The buds were finally beginning to open, soft petals pushing their way into the world. It struck me then how much that rose bush was like me. For years, I'd been buried under expectation, smothered by responsibility. But once I pulled away, once I gave myself space, I started to bloom. Slowly, quietly, but beautifully. And I thought back to my mother, how she'd been celebrated as the family's rock, but at the cost of her own peace. I vowed then, and there I would not be remembered the same way. I would not live for others so much that I forgot myself. Because revenge, I'd learned, wasn't about payback. It was about reclamation. It was about looking in the mirror and finally recognizing the woman staring back. Strong, respected, free. That was the closure I'd been searching for. Not their apologies, not their struggles, but my own liberation. If you followed the story from the beginning, you've seen every step. The humiliation, the silence, the slow burn, the fallout, the confrontations, and now, the quiet victory. And I want to thank you for taking this journey with me. It took me hours, days, really, to pour this all out in a way that did justice to the pain and the growth. So if you've made it this far, I'd ask you to support by subscribing. It may seem like a small gesture to you, but for me, it makes all the difference after all the time it takes to bring these stories to life. The roses in my garden keep blooming now, a reminder of everything I've fought for. Every time I see them, I'm reminded that growth doesn't come from being the rock for everyone else. It comes from finally choosing yourself. And that's what I did. I chose me.